Christian and Richard, thank you very much for joining us at Talking Energy. Firstly, let's start up with you talking about yourselves. So, Christian, if you want to tell us a little bit about what you do, where you come from.
Sure. So, my name is Christian Nicholls. I've been in the energy market for probably longer than I care to remember these days. I joined an oil company straight out of university, worked in their back office. I worked for a couple of oil majors over the years, getting into the trading role, and then moved across to Macquarie Bank in 2005, where I ended up being head of gas and power trading at Macquarie. I was also one of the team that acquired Corona Energy. I sat on the board of Corona Energy. I left there in 2013 to come here, and I think the rest is history, as they say.
And Richard, yourself?
Sure. So following finishing university, I did a master's in climate change and risk. Then I worked.
Wow.
Yeah, it did transition into energy. Then I worked as an analyst in a couple of different roles, and then since 2008, I've been working with really European industrial companies on a range of risk management products across energy markets, both physical and financial structures.
So it seems like both of you have been in the industry for quite a while. So Christian, did you think initially was the energy sector quite something that you thought you would join?
Honestly?
After university?
Honestly, I fell into it. I was in a fortunate position where a friend of mine was working for the company I ended up working for, Emerald Hess, and he said, "Why don't you come and join us?" And literally, I was straight out of university, didn't really know what I wanted to do, and it seemed like a good place to go and work. And actually, looking back in hindsight, it was a good decision.
What would you say attracted you about the industry?
The industry itself, it was, at the time I joined, I was mostly involved in the gas market, and it was at that point where it was really deregulating in the UK. And I think that kind of change, I guess the change, the process it was going through was really exciting at the time. There was a lot of new things happening and a lot of opportunities, particularly for young people who were prepared to get stuck into it.
And Richard, you studied at university. Yeah. What was the thing that attracted you? Was it something you were thinking about coming into?
Yeah, I mean, I think at university, I was doing a lot on climate change, and I think obviously in the context of that discussion, energy is unavoidable. So I was looking at at the back end of university a lot on CO2 pricing, gas pricing, power pricing. And then, fell into energy from there. The thing I like about it really is that energy it's unavoidable. It's as a market, everyone's got some exposure to it, and I think right now where we are with Brook Green, we see that more than ever.
So that's a nice transition into Brook Green. So if you could tell us a little bit more about what the company does,
Yep.
How long it's been established for.
Yeah, so we set Brook Green up in 2015. I think both Christian and myself and the rest of the management team, we've got a lot of experience working with industrial companies and large end users, in the UK and across Europe. And I think the attitude was that what we wanted to do was bring some of our sort of expertise and experience on the financial side and the structuring side into the supply markets. I think our feeling was that the supply markets were more limited than they should be in terms of the scope of products that was available to large end users of energy. And so, and I think the other thing was that whilst I guess the domestic space and the smaller end of the market felt like it was very saturated and very full, for larger consumers who ironically have actually got the much bigger spend and requirement for expertise, the amount of suppliers and I guess counterparts that they could go to was far more limited.
And for you, what was it? What was the transition for you coming into Brook Green?
So like Richard, my background over the last sort of 5 years had been really working with those large industrial consumers in the UK and continental Europe. We'd done quite a lot of work with some of the smaller utilities in the UK, and it was almost a light bulb moment for us. I think we kind of were looking at these companies and we were looking at what we were doing, thinking, actually we can see a gap, we can see a space where we can put our expertise into that space, and actually we think we can build a pretty significant and valuable business off the back of it.
So what is it that Brook Green offers?
So I guess with Brook Green, I mean, the key thing that we're trying to do is be specialised. What you're not going to see us do is go, right, we're going to start servicing, pubs, small shops, domestic households. It's just not where we see ourselves as being able to add value. What we want to be able to do is focus on consumers with material energy spends that are impacted by market changes, regulatory changes, and actually help them optimise and improve I guess their interaction with the energy markets.
So let's move on to some of the issues currently facing in the energy market. So Christian, if you want to start off with, what do you think, in your view, are some of the issues we face?
I mean, one of the big issues we've certainly seen over the last year to 18 months is the volatility in the underlying wholesale markets. We've had the beast from the east, we've had a significant run up in wholesale prices, and that makes it really difficult for the end consumers, A, to work out when do they come to the market to purchase their energy contracts, and B, once they have locked in pricing, what do they do if they've got it wrong? What if they've bought the higher the market? So it's been super difficult, I think, for those guys really to try and understand what's going on. And that's one area that Brook Green, I think, is pretty good at, is looking at markets and trying to understand what's going to happen next from a sort of global market perspective, and try to provide some advice. Now, we don't always get it right, because if we did, then we'd be probably on a beach somewhere. But ultimately, we have a really good instinct in terms of what the market's doing, and a really good network of organisations and people we speak to get that, I guess, that next level of information about where we think prices are going to head.
And talking about prices, we've seen non-energy costs go up over the last few years. Could you add something on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess from the world we were previously in, very much focused on wholesale markets and I guess trading structures. The non-energy costs are something that are pretty new to us, and we've spent an awful lot of time getting our heads around, modelling out and costing into contracts. I think what's clear is that just in the short period of time that we've been in the market since back into 2015 when we set up Brook Green, the non-energy costs have gone up massively. When we're pricing up electricity contracts now regularly, 60% of that cost will be non-energy. I take the combined cost of FIT, CFD, RO, capacity market over the summer, your 40, 45 pounds a megawatt hour, it's right on a par with the wholesale price, just those four costs alone. I think our view is that it is likely to flatten out to some extent. I think after EII came in, I think you'll certainly see RO costs plateau. Same goes for FIT. CFD is the big one for non-energy costs that we're looking at, where you've got real big swings going forward. And then on top of that, you've obviously got all of the transmission and distribution charges that are going to be subject to targeted charging review. So it's one of those things that I think, that the wholesale market, you can look at the screens, you can speak to people in the market, you can form a view, I'd say relatively easily. But the non-energy costs, it's obviously subject to a completely different regulatory process and level of uncertainty as well.
And we hear a lot from suppliers, or we have in the past, about non-energy costs being a burden for consumers, business customers. Is there anything they can do to mitigate that in the long run, or be it energy or non-energy costs?
So the wholesale markets, you've got some control over what you're paying in wholesale costs simply by when you're coming into a contract, when you're signing on the bottom line. That doesn't really exist in the non-energy costs. So your timing doesn't make such a difference. That being said, there are certainly things you can do in terms of bigger picture infrastructure, what you're doing behind the meter, what solutions you're putting in place, how you're optimizing, things on site at your end that can reduce your non-energy cost exposure. But that being said, there are still a lot of uncertainties, I think, looking 2-3 years out, how those costs are going to change anyway.
And while we're talking about prices, like I said, energy bills, energy costs are come as a huge impact for a lot of businesses. Are there any tips or any advice that you could give for business customers? Maybe your 3 top tips that you might have to reduce those costs or kind of control their costs in the long run?
I think probably the first thing I would say is that they need to understand what the energy cost means to them. What if the price goes up, what does that mean to their underlying business? So they need to really understand what the risk associated with the markets moving up, because that then enables them to say, right, if it goes past this price, it's going to cause me a problem. So it informs them when to make a decision. I think once they can do that, it really, I guess, puts them in a position whereby they can drive the process as opposed to sitting back and just saying, well, I need to lock in my energy contract for October. Or do I wait, or what do I do? And so they can then take a much more informed decision about that process.
So moving on to disruptive supply, we've heard this term disruptive quite often over the last year or so. What are your views on disruptive supply and new technologies that are coming into the market at the moment?
Fine. Well, I think, across Brook Green and certainly, our management team, we're completely unanimous on the fact that it's going to happen. We've got to embrace these technologies. The grid, more renewables coming on, more intermittency on the generation side, less flexibility, and more of that flexibility needs to come from the demand side. I think what we see there is that the energy industry as a whole needs to do a better job communicating this to customers. Ultimately, customers' energy bills, for reasons on the wholesale side, on the non-energy side, they're going up. And at the same time, there are all these different mechanisms that are being put in front of customers that offer them these potential savings. I think the key thing for energy suppliers and anyone in the market to be doing is to distill all these different mechanisms down for customers so that they can make more sense of it. I think what we're not convinced at the moment is that there's enough regulatory certainty and that the rewards for flexibility are as high as they need to be for consumers to actually get sufficiently motivated about a lot of those sort of disruptive technologies.
And Christian, I think one of the technologies that keep popping up is battery storage currently. Would you say that is, in your view, or what in terms of what you've heard from industry, is there a demand for that? Are we catching on with the technologies that are coming in?
We're certainly starting to see a lot more projects involving batteries. I think one of the key things moving forward is that, as the battery technology gets better, we'll start to see a decrease in cost to the point where it really does start to make economic sense for, an office, for example, to install a battery, and even down to, a home installing a battery. So I think moving forward, what we'll see is that technology piece will drive that flexibility, both from the supply side and from the demand side. I think that's the key, and certainly from Brook Green's perspective, we want to get to the point using, our portfolio, which is, growing day by day, so that we can actually provide our customers with a spectrum or a suite of demand side response type products that enables them to use the ones that are best for them. And ultimately, that will generate value for both the customer and, provide much more flexibility to the grid.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned about new entrants into the market. We have suppliers entering the market. We also have TPIs coming in, so brokers. And there have been issues in the industry about a few rogue brokers. There are good brokers out there, but a few rogue brokers. Do you think there should be a code of conduct or some kind of regulations in place to ensure these issues are tackled?
So we're only dealing with a small subset of the brokers. We're dealing with, I think, just over 100 of them. And my understanding is there are somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 out there in the market. I would say that as a whole, the brokers we're dealing with, we feel that they conduct themselves very well. We feel that they add value to the customer, and we actually find that they help us getting transactions done. That being said, clearly it's not the case for everyone in the market, and we think there is a need for some sort of regulation. I guess the one thing on that we'd say is that the regulator needs to be very careful how they do it. Regulating that many TPIs is really going to be very difficult, and we'd suggest that it gets done through the suppliers.
How can suppliers ensure that brokers are doing a good job?
Okay, I think ultimately what we're talking about the majority of the time with brokers is transparency. So I guess, what the supplier can do is provide colour to the customer on any commercial agreement between the supplier and the broker. Whether that's about, what the commission is that's being paid, how that commission's being paid, is it upfront or is it pro rata with consumption? And those are changes that certainly for us would be fairly quick to implement.
Mm-hmm. And how big a role or how important a role would you say brokers play in the energy industry?
I think they provide a crucial role, particularly for organisations that don't have their own specific energy purchasing teams, whereby they allow the consumer to canvass, I guess, the whole of the market and find the best price for them. So I think if we didn't have brokers in the space, potentially you'd see not stagnation, but you'd certainly see less competition, I think. So I think those brokers do a really good job of actually sourcing the lowest prices and ultimately keeping the suppliers honest.
Another question I've got to ask you is about Brexit. We had hoped by this interview we would have a decision in the UK, but we've got to wait until the 31st of October. So initially, your thoughts and what do you hope to get out of Brexit?
Well, I think everyone's suffering from a bit of Brexit fatigue. I know I am. Whether you want in or you want out, I think the one thing that everyone we've spoken to, whether it's individuals or businesses, is they just want some clarity and some certainty on what's going to happen moving forward. And I think that's certainly a key issue, because without that certainty, it becomes very difficult for businesses to plan what they're going to do, not just today or tomorrow, but over the coming years. So I think the number one thing we want from Brexit is some clarity on what's going to happen moving forward.
I feel like also the word uncertainty has been thrown around a lot. Every time you ask a business about what they want from government or what they want in the industry, it's always certainty. So what do you, in terms of certainty, what do you want from government or from the regulators?
That's a good question. I think you want them to be consistent. So the big thing about running a business is being able to plan forward and actually make decisions about what you're going to do, not tomorrow or the next day, but for next year and the year after. And that's very difficult in the backdrop of Brexit, because as Richard said, there's a lot of uncertainty around. And so, I think we just need some clarity on where, we're going to go, we're going to be in, we're going to be out, and what does that look like? But also from a regulatory perspective, what does that look like over the next 5 to 10 years? Which just enables businesses to plan with much more confidence than they would do right now.
I mean, I think the main thing is certainty on how things are going to be costed. Ultimately, if the government's saying that we need these renewables on the grid, we need the demand side of the market to be doing X, Y, Z. If you truly want to actually, incentivise investment, attract investment, we need long-term price signals. And I look at the market at the moment, and across so many different costs, you just don't have that certainty. So I think for the end user's perspective, it's absolutely crucial.
And in your view, is there anything businesses can do or take into consideration in the lead up to Brexit?
Again, that's a difficult one to answer. I mean, certainly if you're looking at your business and you've got a supply that's coming up for renewal, and it's maybe it's in October or November or December, I think you need to understand the risks associated with either doing something or not doing something, and how does the underlying price of your energy contract affect your business. I think once you've done that, you can actually start to really make a decision about, do I just wait because prices might go up, prices might go down, or do I need to do something now because actually the price I'm being offered now by a supplier makes sense to my business now. So I think until the business can really understand the level of risk associated with either entering into a new supply agreement or not entering and waiting to get some more certainty or clarity from the Brexit process, it's very difficult for them to make any decisions.
So moving forward, what kind of energy future do you see or hope to see?
I think in terms of the future of energy, it really comes down to providing energy that doesn't have a big carbon footprint. And certainly the renewables we're now seeing on the grid have been, magnificent in terms of how they've reduced that carbon footprint. The difficulty has been, and will be moving forward, is how do you deal with the intermittency of that? And actually, Now we're starting to see technology come to the fore, which allows end users to manage their own demand side. The real key and the real exciting thing about the future of energy is how you marry those two together so that one can fit in for the other. And I certainly start to think back to things like the Beast from the East. Moving forward, I'd like to see a world where, we've got a grid that's run on renewables, but actually we can cope with those stress events because there's so much demand side response in the market that can fill the gap when necessary.
And Richard, yourself?
I think there's going to be a lot of change. I think it will be an exciting period for all of the suppliers in the market. I think the key thing for us is that what really strikes us is that there's so many different mechanisms, revenue streams becoming available to customers. And what needs to happen, and for us the key role of suppliers, is to distill all of that down so that customers can understand it. The reality is that we still have customers that don't quite understand what's happening in a fixed price electricity or gas deal. And the level of complexity and the need for suppliers to be presenting knowledge and understanding is only going to increase. So that's one of the things that we really see as crucial going forwards.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool.